of the next generation, that may no longer be possible. We have absolutely got to have a structural way to prevent one generation from transferring new spending and new debt to the new generation, so that the American ideal is preserved and so that they have a fighting chance to have a better life than their parents.
This Senate can, should, and has shown the ability to reach balanced budgets, no, in fact, surpluses, within living memory. In fact, when President Clinton was the president, this Senate and the House acted together. They adopted budgetary self-restraint. Why amend the Constitution of the United States, our most foundational document, when we have within our own power, recently demonstrated in the late 90s, the capacity to control ourselves? The Senator and I agree that we are leaving to our children an enormous, crushing legacy of a national debt that has exceeded safe boundaries. But why amend the Constitution in order to force the Senate to do our job? Instead, I think we should embrace some of the tough, big, bold, bipartisan proposals that have been put on the table, whether the Bowles-Simpson Commission or others. The framework of a broad deal that requires sacrifice from all, changes to the spiraling federal spending, and changes in the direction of the country is on the table before us. Why take a detour into amending America's foundational document rather than simply stepping up and doing the job that's before us?
The job of each generation is to make sure that the Constitution deals with critical problems facing the country. So we amended the Constitution so that we could prohibit slavery. We amended the Constitution so that we could grant women the right to vote. And we should amend the Constitution to prevent one generation from encumbering the next generation. America is the greatest experiment in self-government, and more importantly, the underlying value of self-control ever designed. But we have seen in recent days that self-control disappear. We work here in the United States Senate, now well on to, I think, 900 days without a budget. This is the most successful corporation or the most successful enterprise on earth, representing the real aspirations for human dignity and freedom, and yet that is in danger if we become indebted to China and other countries in ways that no previous generation of Americans have done. This country has regularly amended the Constitution to fix inequities in our society. And the growing inequity we see today is debt and deficits, especially to other countries. And therefore, we should amend the Constitution to protect those who cannot yet vote from an economic fate that would otherwise befall them.
Mr. President, how much time remains?
On your side, 2 minutes and 20 seconds. On the senator from Illinois' side, 1 minute and 16.
Thank you. As the good senator from Illinois suggests, we are indeed encumbering future generations with a debt that has risen above $40,000 per American. And this is a central challenge of our time, one which our national security leadership has cited as critical to ensuring our security and our liberty going forward. But in my view, the balanced budget amendment that was advanced through Senate Joint Resolution 10 earlier today would compel exactly the sort of intergenerational burdens that my good colleague from Illinois suggests he seeks to avoid. Let me be clear. The requirements of that balanced budget amendment, a spending cap, a supermajority requirement to raise the national debt, a two-thirds requirement for any increase in federal revenue, those in combination would compel drastic, immediate, and substantial reductions in a wide range of programs, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, veterans benefits, that, if imposed, would have not just a short-term, very negative impact on our current economy, but a significant restructuring of the long-standing relationships between individual citizens and generations. Yes, leaving a legacy of debt to the next generation is a terrible thing for us to do. But leaning on the crutch of the Constitution and the fig leaf of a constitutional amendment to avoid doing our responsibility, a job which the Senate is fully capable of doing, avoids that responsibility to the next generation. I close with this question. As we say in the law, Mr. President, if there's a right, what's the remedy? if we were to pass this constitutional amendment, how would it be enforced if the Senate in the future were to fail to balance the budget? Would lifetime federal judges around the country be imposing choices in terms of budget cuts, spending cuts, revenue changes? I think that would be no better, in fact far worse, than the Senate simply doing its job. Today I voted against this balanced budget amendment because I think we have it within our power to show self-control and to secure the future for the next generation of Americans.
And I would close by saying that the Senator and I agree. I think that the Simpson-Bowles plan is the right way to go. And my hope would be that on a bipartisan basis we would join together to reduce expected federal borrowing by $4 trillion along the lines of that bipartisan presidential commission. But unfortunately, the Simpson-Bowles plan right now is gathering dust. That the super committee that was given procedural powers to possibly put that forward also collapsed. We have not been able to do our job. And we are now encumbering the next generation with even greater amounts of debt, historic amounts. I think the Founding Fathers did not contemplate the ability to borrow as much from other countries as we now have. And with the United States as the center of freedom and democracy around the world, there's a lot riding on the credit of the United States. My colleague from Delaware talks about the future, a very vital future, especially for people like my own mother, of Social Security and Medicare. But I think she understands that a bankrupt country cannot support Social Security and Medicare, that we have to defend the credit of the United States. And therefore, I think a balanced budget amendment is essential to the long-term future of the United States. And with that, I thank my colleagues. Thanks, Senator. Well, Mr. President, we've just finished this. I hope we do return to a tradition of actual debate. And I want to thank my colleague for the chance to carry out this debate. Thank you. You bet.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senators Kirk and Coons talking about a balanced budget amendment, two of them to the Constitution, and voted on in the Senate today, both a Republican and Democratic proposal. The Associated Press writes that the proposals were doomed by the partisanship that dominates Congress. All but one Republican voted against a Democratic measure, and every Democrat opposed the GOP-backed version. Amendments to the Constitution must be approved by 2/3 of the House and Senate and 3/4 of the state legislatures. And with those votes today, Congress fulfilled a commitment to take up a balanced budget amendment that was part of an agreement last summer to raise the government's debt limit. On the other side of the Capitol, the House is in recess now, expected back in shortly, a few minutes from now, to vote on the House-Senate compromise on defense programs. A headline in Congressional Quarterly, White House accepts detainee-related changes to defense authorization. White House Press Secretary Jay Carney said Obama administration officials succeeded in prompting House-Senate conferees to remove problematic provisions. At issue was a provision that would require al-Qaeda members and affiliates to be held in military rather than civilian custody. The conference committee made a few changes, producing a report that said the language would not affect the existing criminal enforcement authorities of the FBI or other domestic law enforcement agencies. So because of those changes, in a written statement, Jay Carney said the president's senior advisors will not recommend a veto on the legislation. So the House expected in a few minutes here to vote on that House-Senate compromise, possibly within the next 30 minutes, and then the compromise will likely come here to the Senate for a vote.
Senate floor this evening, I thought I would come and make brief remarks about the extraordinary career of Major General Benny Landrineau. General Landrineau recently retired as the most senior adjutant general in the nation, with nearly 14 years of service as head of the Louisiana National Guard, serving under 3 governors and nearly 4 decades of service to the state of Louisiana and our nation. Over many years, I've had the joy and pleasure of calling General Landrineau a friend and a colleague, and worked closely with him and the 11,000 members of our Louisiana National Guard. Through September 11th attacks to our country, Mr. President, through Hurricanes Katrina, Rita, Gustav, and Ike, and the recent BP oil spill, one of the largest environmental disasters in our nation's history, General Landrineau has proven his leadership to the people of Louisiana and our nation time and time again. Benny, as he's known by his friends, credits his father with inspiring him to serve in the National Guard. His father, Joseph Audrey Landrineau, was a World War II veteran, an engineering soldier, and a combat veteran. Benny, who grew up in Vadrine, Louisiana, chose to follow in his father's footsteps and quickly rose through the ranks in the Louisiana National Guard. A young man in 1969, he enlisted as a light weapons infantry in the 773rd Maintenance Battalion. 2.5 years later, he graduated from Officer Candidate School and became a second lieutenant platoon leader as part of the 3671st Maintenance Company. From these very early beginnings in the National Guard, he progressed rapidly through the ranks. During his time with the Guard, General Landrineau was part of several major campaigns, including a deployment during Desert Storm. And during the first Gulf War, General Landrineau and the 527th Engineering Battalion were tasked with any number of important missions, one important one for the Gulf War commander himself, General Franks. General Franks needed an unmanned aerial vehicle landing strip built immediately. So he knew who to call to get that job done, and he called Benny Landrineau and his battalion. Need I say that it was done, I'm sure, under budget and before time. After the 527th returned to the command headquarters, General Franks called General Landrineau to thank him for what he did, which was extraordinary, and asked the general what could he do as a return favor. And without blinking an eye, General Landrineau just said, "Sir, please get us home, and if you could get us home for Mother's Day, it would be appreciated." So all of these, mostly guys, got home for Mother's Day, some women in the battalion as well, and they were thrilled to be home to be with their parents. In 1996, shortly after the Gulf War, General Landrineau retired from the Department of Agriculture and Natural Resources, where he had served also as a state conservationist for almost 30 years. Since that time, he's taken the National Guard in Louisiana from a strategic reserve force to an operational force that continues to lead the nation both on and off the battlefield, and I want to talk about off the battlefield in just a minute. General Landrineau was quoted as saying, "The Louisiana National Guard soldiers and airmen are part of the finest National Guard in America. It is their dedication and professionalism, their commitment, and their hard work that has made the Louisiana National Guard the finest Guard in America. The Louisiana National Guard has performed in such outstanding matters in accepting new challenges of being an operational force, responding to wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, deploying throughout the world when called on, and at the same time being able to take up the work of their state emergencies, which have been too numerous to count, and being able to respond to the citizens of this state in an outstanding fashion," he said. "This is due in part, I say, to his leadership and vision." General Landrineau has also been instrumental in implementing one of the, I think, most phenomenal programs in our country, Mr. President. The Louisiana National Guard Youth Challenge Program is part of the National Youth Challenge Program. This is what I mean by off-the-battlefield expertise as well as on-the-battlefield expertise. Some years ago, I think about 15, General Conway, who was the general for the National Guard, helped to start this program that now has graduated over 100,000 young people between the ages of 16 and 18 who are unfortunately drifting from the straight and narrow path. They haven't ended up in prison yet, but they're headed that way. They've given up on themselves. They've gotten into a little bit of trouble and need a second chance. This program offers them that chance. Under General Landreneau's leadership, we run 3 of the dozens of programs operating in the United States, and I might say we run the best 3, having been granted and acknowledged in award after award ceremony for many years in Louisiana, and graduate the largest number of young people. This is done because of General Landreneau's extraordinary commitment to the citizens of our state and to the young people of our state, and the respect that he has in his rank and file for these men and women to go beyond their regular duties and responsibilities and step up and say, there is an epidemic in America, our dropout rate is too high, what can the National Guard do in addition to everything else that they do both abroad and at home to help? It's really extraordinary. His grandchildren and his children are proud of him, and I know he is very, very proud of them. I'm going to submit their names for the record. But he has assembled over the last 14 years arguably the most tested staff in the nation. He's being succeeded as Adjutant General by General Glenn Curtis, who has served as General Landreneau's right-hand man for the last 6 years. It is a hallmark of his leadership that General Landreneau leaves a staff ready to step up, ready to serve, and ready to continue the excellent service that they have to the people of our state and our nation. Though General Curtis will bring his own brand of leadership to the National Guard, there's no doubt, and he has said to me many times, he's learned at the elbow of General Benny Landreneau. So let me just say, Mr. President, in conclusion, I would like to personally, on behalf of the people of our state, thank General Benny Landreneau for his many years of service and dedication to the people of Louisiana and our country. I want him to know that he has positively impacted our state in ways that will long be remembered. The people of Louisiana are grateful for his service and for his dedication, and we honor an admirable career in the National Guard. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor. Suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Mr. Alexander.
unanimous consent that my legislative fellows, Aaron Boyd and Sharon Hesney, be given privileges of the floor for the duration of today's session.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I ask also unanimous consent that Senator Whitehouse and I be permitted to engage in a colloquy.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I rise today to address an alarming trend that I see in our national discourse. As legislators, our decisions need to be rooted in facts. Science, driven by data and rigorous analysis, needs to inform our policy making. Scientists are the one who made the U.S. the world's innovator in the last century. Scientists are the people who gave us antibiotics, for example. You like being able to use antibiotics? Well, then thank scientists. Scientists put a man on the moon, several men actually, and got them back safely. These are rocket scientists. Scientists made it possible for Americans to watch this speech on C-SPAN. That's C-SPAN, the satellite cable public affairs network, also rocket scientists. Scientists also came up with useful things like the Internet. A scientist from the University of Minnesota, Nobel Prize-winning agronomist named Norman Borlaug, is credited with saving over 1 billion lives worldwide. He did this by using science to develop a high-yield, disease-resistant wheat that was planted in Pakistan and India and elsewhere around the world. And by engineering our next-generation weapon system, scientists ensure that our military will continue to be the most powerful in the world. We rely on science and scientists. And if we are to progress as a country, if we and future generations of Americans are to be healthy and prosperous and safe, we better put science right at the center of our decision-making. And yet right now, foundations and think tanks funded by the fossil fuel industry are spreading misinformation about the integrity of climate science. Much as think tanks paid by the tobacco industry use misinformation to cast doubt about the health hazards of smoking. Ignoring or flat out contradicting what climate scientists are telling us about the warming climate and the warming planet can lead to really bad decisions on national energy and environmental policy here in Congress. So today, Senator Whitehouse and I want to take some time to talk about climate science and about the fact that a scientific consensus on climate change has been reached. Climate change is happening and is being driven by human activities. From the National Academy of Sciences to the American Meteorological Society to the American Academy for the Advancement of Science, all of our preeminent scientific institutions agree that man-made greenhouse gas emissions are warming the planet and are a threat to our economy, to our security, and to our health. So do the overwhelming majority of actively publishing climatologists. This graph, taken from a study published by the National Academy of Sciences, shows responses to the survey question, do you think human activity is a significant contributing factor in changing mean global temperatures? What you see here is that as climate expertise goes up, so does the affirmation that climate change is real and is caused by human beings. Among the most expert pool of respondents, climatologists who are actively publishing on climate change, represented by this bar right here, the rightmost bar, 97% of that category of scientists answered yes. Of course, there are a few articles published by climate skeptics in peer-reviewed journals, but the vast majority, 97%, of the peer-reviewed literature supports the notion that people are causing the Earth's climate to change. Now, what are peer-reviewed articles? Well, they are articles that scientists write after conducting experiments. The experiments are designed to test a hypothesis. If the hypothesis holds up, the scientist writes a paper describing the experiment and sends it to a professional journal. The journal then sends it to other experts in the field, peer reviewers, who see if they can tear any holes in the theory. They question the methodology. They check the math. Very often, they send the paper back with questions, and the researchers will make changes to satisfy the reviewers' inquiries. If, in the end, the peer reviewers think the work is sound, they recommend the paper for publication. Then, after publication, other scientists in the field are free to read the paper and poke away and disprove it if they can. That's a peer-reviewed paper. And I repeat, the vast majority of peer-reviewed literature supports the notion that people are causing the Earth's climate to change, and 97% of published climatologists say yes when asked, do you think human activity is a significant contributing factor in changing mean global temperatures?
Senator Franken, as you have pointed out, despite the efforts to mislead and create doubt, the jury is not out on whether climate change is happening and being caused by man-made carbon pollution. The verdict is in fact in, and the verdict is clear. As shown by this group of scientific organizations that signed a letter supporting our efforts to do something about carbon pollution in the Senate back in October of 2009, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the American Chemical Society, the Geophysical Union, the Meteorological Society, the Natural Science Collections Alliance, the Botanical Society of America. Virtually every significant scientific organization accepts that these are the facts and that the verdict is in. And indeed, there's some recent added support. The scientific community continues to examine this question, and a recent report by James Hansen and Makiko Sato says climate change is likely to be the predominant scientific, economic, political, and moral issue of the 21st century. The fate of humanity and nature may depend upon early recognition and understanding of human-made effects on Earth's climate. They continue, Earth is poised to experience strong amplifying polar feedbacks in response to moderate global warming. Thus, goals to limit human-made warming to 2 degrees Celsius are not sufficient. They are prescriptions for disaster. Another recent report, Climate Change and European Marine Ecosystem Research, reads as follows: there is no doubt that rapid global warming and ocean acidification are real, and very high confidence that both are forced by human activities and emissions of carbon dioxide. Climate change effects are especially evident in the oceans. I'll get into that later on in our colloquy a little bit further. And the levels of atmospheric CO2 are accelerating. A third report, the World Energy Outlook for 2011, says that global energy-related carbon dioxide emissions reached 30.4 gigatons in 2010, 5.3% above 2009, representing almost unprecedented annual growth. In the new policy scenario, our central scenario, CO2 emissions continue to increase, reaching 36.4 gigatons in 2035 and leading to an emissions trajectory consistent with a long-term global temperature increase, a long-term global temperature increase of 3.5 degrees centigrade. What does that mean? The expected warming of more than 3.5 degrees centigrade in the new policy scenario would have severe consequences. A sea level rise of up to 2 meters, causing dislocation of human settlements and changes to rainfall patterns, drought, flood, and heat wave incidents that would severely affect food production, human disease, and mortality. There are also iconic American companies that have made the considered business judgment that climate change is real and we need to prepare, but we can get more to that later in the colloquy.